welcome to another episode of Harbourside Chats. I am Governor John Rolle of the Central Bank of the Bahamas, and we are holding these discussions on the occasion of the Central Bank's 50th anniversary. Today, we're having a conversation on the environment in the Bahamas around the ease of doing business and the role that the Central Bank and other stakeholders play in that process. Particularly with me today, the conversation is focusing on our chambers of commerce and civil society. So I'm very pleased, therefore, to have with me as part of that conversation, first of all, Dr. Leo Rolle, who is the CEO of the Bahamas Chambers of Commerce and Employers Confederation, Dr. Anthony Hamilton, who is the president of Civil Society Bahamas, and joining us from Eleuthera with a Family Island perspective, Mr. Thomas Sands Jr., who's the president of the Eleuthera Chamber of Commerce. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Good morning, thank you.
And before we get into the particulars of this conversation, I just want to have a bit of an introduction to each of you so that our viewers can understand your background. And let's start with you, Dr. Rolle. You've had a very extensive career in the private sector, and you've transitioned now to heading up the Chamber of Commerce. How has your diverse background in getting to this point prepared you for this new task?
Okay, thank you for the question. Great question, sir. I think my background has always been littered with, as you said, a number of entities. However, working directly with small business through the Small Business Development Center, I think has been one of the greatest impetus to help me in the role that I am at now. Because what it does is it allows me to see the challenges that small businesses have, both from the standpoint of actually development and from the standpoint of training, entrepreneurship, and those endeavors, having been a teacher and still a lecturer myself. And so I think the roles that I've had in the past have helped to kind of streamline and straighten the path where I'm at today. And so I'm hoping that I'm able to provide a level of support to small businesses given my background.
Thank you. And Dr. Hamilton, I know that you've been involved with Civil Society Bahamas for at least a decade. I know you also wear a professional hat in another sphere. But in terms of your role in Civil Society Bahamas, what advice, based upon the experience that you've gained, do you have for others who might eventually move into a role such as yours?
Thank you, Dr. Rolle. I'm most pleased. I decided to do a prepared statement to encompass the civil society sector because of my diverse engagement in the society.
Please.
And so I'll just run right into that. The most important lesson that I've embraced as the president of Civil Society Bahamas, as the apex body of civil society organizations for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, is to have a healthy appreciation of the need for the unique national unity experience of people being the most important assets and investments of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Having said that, further to always promote the key priorities of inclusion and consultation through a tripart governance structure of accountability to facilitate an effective and efficient execution of leadership responsibilities as advocate, mediator, and administrator, while mitigating corruption, conspiracy, and cultural contamination in the best interests of both the citizenry and residents of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. This conviction is demonstrated through the Civil Society Bahamas Memorandum of Association of Section 4, subsection 1, which states as follows, and I quote, "Civil Society Bahamas searches for and identifies at any given time the myriad of problems that confront our society, either on its own volition or through the public at large, and search for solutions to these problems. The solutions are derived at after proper education and feedback from society through radio programs, television programs, town meetings, the internet, and other appropriate public forums," end quote. Therefore, my advice to future leaders of civil society sector is to always seek to be authentic as a leader, to encourage trust by the internal and external stakeholders while breaking silos, and to be immersed in the foundational documents of Civil Society Bahamas and the civil society sector legislation, inclusive of the preamble of the Constitution and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you very much. And so let's turn to you, Mr. Sands. You've stayed on the island of Eleuthera. You've been very active in a diverse range of business activities, including real estate, and now you're heading up the Eleuthera Chamber of Commerce. How has the experience that you gained over the years prepared you to take on the leadership of the chamber?
So, Governor Rolle, with the exception of a period of time of traveling for education abroad, essentially I grew up on the island of Eleuthera, involved with many businesses and opportunities to learn from my parents, my grandparents, and other members of my families who were involved in various aspects of entrepreneurship, businesses, real estate. And in fact, our company has been in existence for 48 years. And so that has placed a unique perspective on not only the creation, but the operation of businesses in a family island perspective. What it has also helped me to do is to use what I've learned to also connect local businesses and individuals with investors who enter our community. And so through the Eleuthera Chamber of Commerce, we have focused on developing a voice, a space to connect and to communicate, to bring into place technology, shared workspace opportunities, and focus on lobbying for a conducive ecosystem for the development and growth of commerce in the island of Eleuthera, and also encourage the Bahamas government to consider the need to create a special environment that focuses on the development and revitalizations of environments like this as a means to the diversification of the country, and that the family islands are an incredible resource for the future development of the country.
Let's begin, though, to speak about the ease of doing business and understand that the Bahamas is also compared with other countries globally. As a matter of fact, I'm told that there are over 190 countries where there's an index that's compiled in terms of how easy it is to do business. And some of the factors that go into this index looks at how easy it is to pay taxes, doing banking, the ease of getting credit from banks, the ease of getting through the approval process, say for setting up a business, etc., and many other issues that relate to commerce. And so I want to start with you, Dr. Hamilton. When you look at what goes into influencing how easy it is to do business in a country like the Bahamas, how do you distinguish between the role or the responsibility that you would assign to, say, the government in general or a central bank?
When I think of the 700 islands in the Bahamas, and we think from another perspective, we have 28 of them rather, would have airports. And we think of commerce, trade and commerce. The means of doing business between the two of them, keeping the economy actually flowing in a proper fashion. Small businesses, policies with regard to inclusion and consultation of the entrepreneurs is very, very important. From the civil society sector, in terms of the three aspects of the society, the commerce, and also the political arena. The idea of being able to get feedback and having a healthy dialogue regarding the citizenry is most important. You made mention earlier regard to from the international aspect of this. We, from the government aspect of being engaged with consultation nationally, regionally, and internationally, this is a very important space for civil society because we actually engage with the respective ministries. And I mentioned silos in the earlier portion because of the distinction between the respective ministries and ensuring communication. Communication is the biggest link in terms of helping the situation so we can feed information in and be able to do scientific assessments to determine what kind of policies ought to be made from the government's end of it as well as the central bank in terms of the immediate need in the society.
Okay, thank you very much. So I want to go now to the Chambers of Commerce and ask you, Dr. Rolle, can you say that there are 2 or 3 top challenges that businesses would express on average around, say, the ease of getting set up and started in the Bahamas?
Thank you for the question, Governor. I would say that there are a myriad of challenges. However, I will answer your question with the 3. I think the 3 biggest challenges are, as you mentioned, access to capital. Businesses find it hard. When you think about the life cycle of a business and you think about those fledgling entrepreneurs or those fledgling businesses trying to access capital, you think about the challenges around getting a business plan that's proper or actually accurate created. You think about banks and their flexibility to lend to a business, especially if they don't have historical financials where there's a proven track record. They're then going from the pro forma financials, which are truly a pie in the sky in most instances, depiction of what the business thinks they can do. And so access to capital is one. And then when they are actually funded, I find that one of the biggest challenges is businesses or entrepreneurs, when they hit that proverbial wall, which usually happens at the 2nd year of them doing business, had they had proper training, coaching, mentorship, and the proper, or avenues to ensure that they understand how business works, they understand financial statements, they understand pricing mechanisms, it would be easier for them. And the 3rd thing is, of course, as you mentioned, the ability or ease to be compliant. I think the way the tax system is now and the loopholes it has, as well as the sort of forceful nature in which taxes are being hunted after, somehow forces businesses, in my estimation, into the informal economy, such that you should make it as easy as possible or as burden-free as possible for a business to want to be compliant, rather than an impediment and making them or forcing them into an industry where either they close down or they aren't completely non-compliant. And so the ease of doing business through taxes, paying taxes, being compliant, access to capital, and of course that education and training component.
So you mentioned this idea of people having to put together business plans.
Yes, sir.
And we can have different views as to whether that's important in terms of the conversation around opening up a bank account, because I know sometimes the banks will ask for a business plan. But a business plan is valuable in and of itself.
Yes.
How good a job are we doing, or how well are we prepared as entrepreneurs in terms of getting through that process?
I think one of the challenges lies in, one, very good business plan writers who can execute and write a business plan, because what you find is the plan that they wrote does not represent, in most instances, what the business owner is actually seeking to do. Another challenge is the business owner has to be intricately involved in that process from start to finish. Otherwise, you have a beautiful plan that was prepared for you, but when it comes time to execute, you can't execute it because you weren't involved in the process. And so the plan itself is important, but it's equally as important for the entrepreneur to be intricately involved in that process. What I find, though, is that if I were a business plan writer, I would listen to the entrepreneur, yes, but I would also guide them. What I find most times is that the business plan writer writes the plan, and they take whatever the entrepreneur says without giving their input. And so they may say, okay, I can open 7 days a week and I may make 100,000. Well, based on this industry, there are other persons who have not even made 50,000. So what do you plan to do differently or better that will get you to that point? So if you challenge the process with the entrepreneur, it becomes an easier flow, and then the plan is also, it becomes a great plan, but it also becomes one that can be executed in the final stages.
Okay, thank you very much. And so now, Mr. Sands, I want to ask you from a slightly different angle. You're on the island of Eleuthera or any other island for that purpose, and you're thinking about setting up a business, and you see what that experience was like on the island of New Providence. What makes it different for someone who's trying to get into business on a family island in terms of the experience or the ease?
Well, Governor Rolle, I'd first of all like to build upon what Dr. Rolle had said, and I think a lot of his points are very fundamental to a new entrepreneur trying to establish. But what we see a lot in the family islands are legacy operators who are now faced with some unique challenges. And as we begin to see growth in the family islands, what they are doing is going through the process of revitalizing businesses or passing it on to another generation. And what makes our situation even more complex, in addition to what Dr. Rolle has mentioned, is infrastructure. Quite simply, you cannot operate a business if you don't have power, if you don't have water, if you don't have communications. You can't do banking electronically if you don't have communications. We have some fundamental challenges which have to be resolved uh, in terms of the base level of operation for legacy businesses or a startup. And let's put in the context of startup. If I were to attempt to start up a business today from the energy perspective and utilities, I have to have redundancy in terms of the supply of water, backup power, and backup for my internet communications. That is a baseline of where I must start, because the reliability of all systems is inconsistent.
What we know is part of the experience if you're interacting with banks is today people are having to set appointments often weeks in advance to get through the process of opening up an account. And also the experience, not necessarily positive, is that banks are also changing the way they're delivering the services once the relationships are established. You know, some of it might be interpreted as that you're just trying to manage the bottom line, or the banks are saying that, you know, there are costs that they're trying to manage and the like. When you look at it from the point of view of those of us on the receiving end, and let's just suppose that cost is an issue, do you have a view, Mr. Sands, as to what we can do from the office's side to influence or to make the cost structure more favorable for banks?
Let me say that, Governor Rolle, I don't feel that the banks have made a good decision over the last 15 years in their relationships with the family islands. They took a posture that they would exit communities without, I think, consultation themselves, without trying to investigate options. They also, in turn, took an approach in terms of funding and financing where decisions were made to discount appraised values of real estate. As an entrepreneur, any entrepreneur must look at how you grow your business and take an approach that is proactive in the growth of that business and how you generate new returns. I think the discussion in terms of an island such as Eleuthera today is there's been significant economic growth, the largest period of financial investment, foreign direct investment in a lifetime. And so I think just as we all had to tweak during a COVID to improve our businesses, we must in turn ask the banks to revisit what servicing an Eleuthera market looks like and how, and I always hear the discussion about liquidity in the Bahamas. Banks have money to lend and so forth, and they are in the business of lending money. I would invite them to take an approach to look at one of the largest growth periods, specifically in the island of Eleuthera, and determine a business model which allows them to grow their revenue, and so that expenses then fall in line, and the model that it takes, the tweaking of a business model that then supports the rollout and support that is necessary to grow an economy.
Yeah, and I think, again, when we look at the issue of banking services, a lot of what banks do by way of the lending side is focused on personal or consumer lending, so we're not even touching the surface yet in terms of the business side of lending.
Correct. And
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 so,
can
so we
I
have to
add
get
the
back
real
to that,
estate
yes.
opportunities?
Yes.
The real estate opportunities, we're seeing the largest sale of real estate in the island of Eleuthera than we've seen for a long time. So you have both individual sales, you have foreign direct investment, and you have a migration to the islands of Bahamians and non-Bahamians. That must be large enough for a bank to consider how it can make a business model work.
Yeah.
But from the perspective that there is a cost issue, right? And let's suppose we don't deny the fact that they're looking at it from a business perspective. I'm the last person to defend the banks, trust me. But I just want to ask, and maybe I can punt this question to you, Dr. Rolle. You know, is there anything that we can do on the opposite side of the table to try and influence the cost lower for banks?
I think one part of it lies in, and as you mentioned, they're tailoring the way services are provided to try to make sure that the bottom line is not eroded too much and it's attractive. And so we do encourage our members to embrace digital technology and ensure that banking online using various methods of payments rather than cash. As Mr. Sands rightfully mentioned, though, you can do those things, but if the infrastructure is poor in that you're not able to actually access banking online, you're not able to accept a credit card, then that becomes a challenge. We're obviously opposed to any new taxes or any new costs on any member, because at the end of the day, especially when you think of an MSME, costs will of course eat away from their actual profits. And so we would encourage our members, as we often do, to embrace digital technology to ensure that, you know, those banking fees are minimal at best. One of the challenges we find, though, is that oftentimes if an entrepreneur speaks to the bank relative to their, because when I think about an entrepreneur, if they access capital, most banks, or some of the banks that I've worked with, are willing to work with the entrepreneur and provide alternative means. When you think about them actually accessing capital, perhaps in the initial instance, loan officers, as we all know, have targets. And so they may give you everything in the kitchen sink because they have a target that they need to meet. So I give you a checking account, a cash account, a credit card, and all of these different services. But now if I go in as an entrepreneur and say, listen, these are too cost prohibitive to my business, then you can tailor a package that's indicative to me that can help me to ensure that I'm successful at the end of the day.
Thank you. And so I want to ask you another question, Mr. Sands, and then I'll come to you, Dr. Hamilton. You know, what sort of advice do you give to up-and-coming entrepreneurs on the island of Eleuthera in terms of how they can be successful and effective in that environment with the kinds of challenges that you mentioned around, you know, taking advantage of banking services that are less than convenient and some of the other infrastructural challenges? How do you advise them to go about being successful in that setting?
It's important that a business owner operator understands the business that he's getting in. He needs to understand that operation intricately. He needs to take the time to understand the pros and cons. I mean, the good thing with legacy businesses, they generally understand their business. Someone coming new is a little bit naive about the reality of operating in an island setting. What works in a Nassau, you know, is just totally different because of the lack of so many resources. So knowing your business, knowing your customer and your customer's needs, wants, desires, and how that service is delivered. And again, the client base in an island is different from a client base in Nassau, and what their expectations are and what their desires are and how that service is delivered. I think we should also not be compromising any standards in terms of customer service. And so there's some very sophisticated, well-traveled individuals who are coming to the island of Eleuthera and choosing to avoid a Nassau or Grand Bahama. They do not want to go to the city, and they're looking for a different quality of experience. You must understand that. And then I think the next thing is technology. You must embrace technology from the beginning. You must collect data, analyze that data, know your customer base as it evolves. And the customer base in every business is always changing. We find that also in the islands, the cost of importation, and everything is important, is it changing dramatically? I remember I tell the story, one of my businesses is a supermarket. And we used to be able to count on the price of a product being the same for years. Today, the cost of a product and cost of getting that product delivered and handling to you changes in every delivery. Every delivery that I have every week, and we have 3 or 4 deliveries a week. Every day that price point is changing. And so, I think there is an impression by entrepreneurs or people who want to enter business that it's a slam dunk, that it's, it's a TikTok or a Facebook easy instant gratification solution. It is not. It is a commitment of resources, time, energy, learning that business from the ground up. And you find, again, in the family islands, that been in the grocery business. I have a business degree, and the legacy training that I had from my parents meant I had to do the plumbing, I had to do the electrical, I had to figure out the refrigeration. All of that I learned through legacy knowledge that was provided to me from those operating the business. This is a totally different environment than you would experience in a city setting. And so it is not an easy task, but success comes with the commitment to a long-term investment of all of these resources and all of the time. I think, let me add a final point, is that given the growth that is taking place in a family island, the next major challenge is human resource, and human resource that understands the client base and where the community is going and how you must deliver that service. So, I would say take your time, get to know it. Writing a business plan is not the same as operating it. Get a lot of advice.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Hamilton, the central bank is working with a cross-section of stakeholders looking at how we can address or improve the experience or the ease around doing banking and getting set up with a bank account. Can you offer maybe 2 or 3 good recommendations that either the central bank or the government can take on board to make this process easier?
Planning, organizing, implementation, and evaluation. It's a process, a system. The reality of good collection of quality statistical data to drive our decision-making process is critical in the midst of this. Diversity with regard to our economy as we avoid being Nassau-centric and give consideration to family islands. We spoke of Eleuthera. You have an Acklands, you have an Inagua, you have a Grand Bahama and Abaco. All of these are diverse. With respect to policy formulation and legislation to guide this, one of the things that popped up as we were having the dialogue just now, the civil society sector has been encountering immense difficulty with regard to opening bank accounts. 2 entities that I'm very familiar with right now, it's taken about 6 months, and it seems like the goalposts keep slipping. Every time we figure we have complete data, you find that something else is popping up. And incidentally, this is with the same institution. And giving consideration to other institutions, now you have to start the process all over again. One of the things I'd say here too is the KYC rather. The reality of many of our folks have not been aggressive in the banking system. And so the requirements of bringing all the government documentation, and it gets even more complex when you think about commercial business, because access to capital, again, respect to those family islands and also New Providence, is amazing right in New Providence. The qualifying factor in the bank seems to be shifting every so often. So with regard to the central bank and also the government of Bahamas, all the government agencies, government ministries and agencies, the data that's collected on a daily basis, bringing that data together so we can probably assess and determine the trends that are actually happening. Let's take, for instance, the Ministry of Social Services. The needs that are being called on in social services, to address challenges by way of socioeconomic challenges, policy decisions, changing legislation or amendments to legislation is one thing that can happen there. The central bank, in terms of in some sectors, we speak about trying to get data, and you'd figure you're doing business. Let's say, for instance, an aviation situation, we have a member from the aviation sector in Civil Society Bahamas, and you buying money to pay bills from transactions that are generated here in the country. Policy decisions, consultation, inclusion in the process, being to the table to help to influence those decisions that will be made. Those are two primary things between the government and the central bank.
And you mentioned KYC, or the due diligence process.
Right.
Now, part of what banks do when they open up an account relationship is they try to size up the risk of a business, and risk not from the point of view whether your business fails or succeeds, but whether you could be introducing illicit cash flows into your account. So a part of KYC is understanding the profile of the business and how to monitor. And I want to put the emphasis on monitoring, because the heavy lifting that financial institutions should be doing is, once they have a profile of what your business looks like and the cash flows, they monitor the actual cash flows so that they can determine whether you're falling within the acceptable ranges. So know your customer and the due diligence process is not intended or endorsed as a way to keep entities out of the access to bank accounts. And that's one of the things that we do put a lot of energy and effort into trying and sensitize banks about, even though we still understand that there are certain range of businesses that banks will say outright that they do not bank. That's an easier decision if you show up at the bank and they say we don't bank this type of business, as opposed to the process where the assessment might be very drawn out. So I just want to make that very clear in terms of how we address the ease of banking. And you mentioned data and information. That feeds into how easy it is to put together even a business proposal or a business plan,
Right.
to know that you're basing it on reliable,
Scientific information.
reliable information.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk about this issue of capital again, because we mentioned that typically in the Bahamas you don't get much by way of business financing.
No.
You get some, but not to the level that you would expect in a more balanced financial setting. And so I want to know from you, Dr. Rolle, how are businesses on average in the Bahamas resourcing capital for startup?
The businesses I've seen in working with the MSME community have either gone through it in finding the capital themselves, so raising the capital or saving the capital. Grants have helped quite a bit, and so some of the businesses access grants. And there are a few, it is growing now, but there are a few who have accessed capital by way of bank funding. What we found when I was intricately involved in the process of onboarding a number of entities to begin the government guaranteed loan program with the SBDC, was that a lot of the entities that we approached did not have a business banking sector. And so it was sort of a trial and error period, because they needed to first create the sector, then train someone to know what to look for when they're doing a business loan, and then determine how much capital they're putting towards this pocket of business. We found that some of the banks were more amenable because they had business banking, and then others weren't. But by and large, businesses are either accessing grants or they're getting the capital on their own and then starting businesses. Now, as I said before, especially with the implementation of the government guaranteed loan program, you find more and more entities are willing and able and have the capability, as Mr. Sands mentioned, capacity building. And so with more persons in that sector being trained to understand how to actually complete a break-even analysis, how to do a quick cost breakdown to determine if these financials are stress tests, so to speak, to determine if these financials are realistic or not, how to read the business plan to understand and assess and not just to read the language. So when I read a business plan, I read it backwards. I read the financials first, and then I go back to see how your financials tie into the narrative that you have. And so it's things like that that I think can help. But I do see a very promising progression of businesses accessing capital by way of banking, by way of bank loans.
And on this issue of collateral, so right now in the Bahamas, we are in the final stages of legislation that will allow for more than just real estate to be secured
Yes.
For credit. So if you have receivables,
Factoring.
intellectual property, etc. But earlier we had a conversation around the valuation on real estate, and I want to ask you this, Mr. Sands. How much further does not real estate on the Family Islands go in backing a request for bank credit?
So there was a period of time where banks, so over the 15-year period, as economy slowed in the islands, where the discussion was that, yes, it's a market value, but we'll discount and only use a certain percentage, less than if it were in Nassau, as a value for collateral. That discussion, I think, is changing today as a result of a growing market. And realistically, if the right principles are in play from day one, if the evaluations are done correctly and the data is collected correctly, there is a market value that is as strong anywhere in the country based on what is taking place in the sales in our market. I would say that we have seen in recent times exponential appreciation in property on the island of Eleuthera as the market has grown. There's always been consistent value in appreciation, but the rate of appreciation over recent time frames have increased dramatically. And that's the strength of building an economy. I think the bigger picture here for us, Governor, is that we must build economies, each one of these ecosystems, each one of these environments in such a way that there's a path, a consistent incentives. And we talk about banking, we need to have banking services. So banks may have to be encouraged and incentivized to step into place to form part of that ecosystem. And they need to participate as partners in the growth and development of that ecosystem. If they do, they will receive rewards as they build loyalty and so forth and participate. But there is strength in real estate and the value of real estate. I would hedge my bets in real estate before cryptocurrency and all these other things that have come and gone. But of course, the same principles apply everywhere else in terms of location, how well they are built, and what is happening in terms of trade in that market.
Thank you. Dr. Rolle, when we talk about financing, around about 2017, the central bank, consulting with the government, we relaxed exchange controls to empower businesses to go there and raise US dollars or other capital if necessary to fund their business. And so from the permissibility point of view, it's possible, and it was also a response to businesses' view that in some cases they could probably find funding cheaper elsewhere. It's still more of an idea. I think you see some use, but from your assessment, what is it that's missing from the equation in terms of businesses and individuals being successful in tapping into foreign funds?
One of the things that we were adamant on doing was trying to connect. I think what is missing is the connection. So a lot of entrepreneurs don't know where the capital is that they can access. And so what we've been doing from a chamber standpoint is next year you will see a number of trade missions where we're actually going to these various countries with business owners, and they can then have access to some of the FDI or foreign direct investors who can actually bring to the table the currency or the funding that they actually need. And so first building that bridge to connect them and saying, okay, we're doing a trade mission, I don't know, to Morocco, to China, to Kuwait, to Dubai, and so this is where some of the entrepreneurs are. And working closely with the investment community there will first bridge that gap between helping them to get to the investor, and then when they get to the investor, we won't leave them alone. So we will help them by helping them to speak the language that the investor can actually understand and respond to.
Let's have at least one round of conversation on inclusivity in the business environment. So there are two dimensions to this. One, which we hear about a lot, is Bahamians versus non-Bahamians and the opportunities that you can give them access to in this economy. But the other way we talk about inclusivity globally as well as to whether the opportunities in business look the same for men as they do for women. So I know what you were going to say about how the government can open up the space a lot more and give Bahamians better access to all of the opportunities that are out there. But I'm going to start with you, Mr. Sands. How are we doing in terms of the business environment for males versus female in the Bahamas in terms of how easy it is for either gender?
So I would say in terms of the family, and I grew up in a family business with two very strong sisters who stood side by side as we grew our business. I grew up with, a grandmother both grandmothers who lost their husbands at a very young time in their lives, and they grew businesses. They grew businesses in the Family Islands, and women have played a strong role in the growth and development of Family Island communities that I've experienced in the island of Eleuthera. And I believe that opportunity still exists. Again, I stand to be corrected, but I see go-getters who are prepared, or entrepreneurs who are prepared to do the work and so forth. I see them having similar challenges as men in business, but I see them, at least again in the Family Islands, being creative and going after their piece of the puzzle, piece of the pie. In fact, on the real estate side, I think like in this Airbnb business, from a Bahamian perspective, I probably get more calls from females about entering that business than I do from males. And in some instances, it may be the wife giving me a call if there's a marriage in place. And so I think there is an appetite. I think there's a desire. But they face many of the same challenges that I think a male would find in this process. The challenge, again, in that particular field, we go back to real estate, is finding property that is transferable, good titles. There's some issues with that. Subdivision regulations have increased the cost of entry, and the time it takes to transact in real estate in the Bahamas is significantly higher greater than most locations in the world. So that is displacing, opportunities and discouraging, I think, investment.
Does the Chamber of Commerce pay any attention to the gender issue in business?
Absolutely. Governor, your questions seem to come directly from my playbook. I dabble in quite a number of things, and one of the things I did the other day, so grant writing is a passion of mine, and so the U.S. Embassy had a grant that was open. It's called a diplomacy grant. And so from a chamber standpoint, we wrote to have access to some of the funding for that grant, and the program is specifically called the Girl Boss Project. And it's meant to bring awareness both to young girls and women in entrepreneurship, to help them to become more involved in what we would call male-dominated industries, like construction, like IT, graphic design, etc. What I found in my career is that women will ask for less than a man in the same industry or the same business. And what I chalk it up to is that women are naturally, not frugal, but they can naturally manage resources, it seems, better than a male. And so what male have to take $1 to do, a woman could do in 50 cents. And so they're asking for less, but we encourage them to ask for more, because sometimes what happens is, in the asking for less, the capital that they need to raise is underfunding the business, or it's something that they didn't consider or they thought that they can do it themselves or get it done alternatively. And so, yes, I agree with Mr. Sands. They do have some of the same challenges, but I do want to see more female entrepreneurs in those male-dominated industries, and asking for more capital to kind of run their businesses.
Okay. And Dr. Hamilton, what does civil society have to say about this issue?
Two other things I'll bring to bear with this. A national development plan with accountability, an agreed national development plan, let's say it right, so that the full spectrum would be taken into consideration, and we are guided scientifically in the sense of what is actually happening in our immediate environment. Coupled with that is more prominence for the cooperative sector, financials and the non-financials, the credit unions and the particularly thinking of family islands in terms of development. Those are some factors that need to come to bear. As far as the women, I feel that once opportunities are presented to families, that's the key thing. Mr. Sands made mention of his household. I happen to be in a household where my daughter and my wife is actually running a business. I'm supporting them. But the women are looking for opportunities, but families are in desperate need of those opportunities. I think in our society, a lot of emphasis recently has been placed on trying to give the women an opportunity. But if we do this to the detriment of the men, we create another problem. So we need to be approaching it from a family perspective. Where the interest is helping to populate more in terms of capital access. Now, there's been some very creative things done recently with regard to funding targeted to particular aspects. And we need to be more diverse in sector appreciation. Some of the sectors are struggling, and we're paying attention in one area. So the scientific information helps us to recognize, let's say, for instance, business license or even the work permits by way of immigration. What is happening? And bringing this information into the pool so we can know we're having success in this particular area. How can we improve that success? We're having failures in this particular area. How can we mitigate those failures in these particular areas? And I think we'll be well on our way, because we're thinking about the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in terms of Bahamians. It's not male or female. It's Bahamians, because the families. We realize we have some challenges in the families too, broken families. And how do we find means of giving them access as opposed to pushing them into social services?
I want us to have a quick conversation on resilience. So when we look at resilience in a country like the Bahamas, we think about, how you can withstand, say, for example, in our case, the threats that are coming at us from climate change. This year, 2024, we expect a very active hurricane season, and we think about how the government contributes to having a robust infrastructure for telecoms and electricity that can withstand storms and that you can bounce back. I want to know, and I'll start with you, Mr. Sands. What is the advice that you give to business individuals about how they think about the resiliency within their operations, assume everything else is falling in place the way we would like for them to fall in place? What should they be taking care of inside the operations in this very risky hurricane belt, and thinking about all of the risk and adaptation issues around climate change?
So, Governor, I am deeply concerned where Eleuthera is today. What do businesses have to do? The Eleuthera Chamber of Commerce has started a discussion looking for advice from both some funding institutions as well as some persons in renewable energy spaces to discuss how can we quickly put in place what we call, at the first stage, a business continuity and resilience plan, and that is at the baseline, water, power, telecommunications. How do we then move it to the next step of energy efficiency and the further step of renewable energy integration? I would say to a business starting out, plan that into your master plan before you start. The redundancies in a family island are so critical. So again, in any business operating today, you have to have a backup water system, you have to have a backup generator, you have to have, in addition to cable and BTC, I have to have a Starlink to make sure that my business can operate. In terms of equipment, you have to have a backup parts. So I have 2 of every part that I need to operate my business in a family island. That is part of the business model that you must plan for so that you could make sure that you can operate your business, you can keep the doors open, you can deal with repairs that need to happen immediately, because in a lot of instances, there's no technician here, there's no parts available here. And so I would say, as a critical stage, talk to someone who's in that business, talk to people who are on the islands, find out what you need to operate, survive, and God forbid if a hurricane comes, what do you do next? And the toughest thing is, I mean, after you get through the hurricane, the next step is, how do you survive for the days after that? And so that must be part of your strategy now in the immediate term, the short term, and the long term. And again, I go back to this thing is that an ecosystem must be designed with a plan to resolve these issues, but not just for the short term. And I think we're very active in the Bahamas. We are seeing growth at a level that we have not seen in many years. And so what does that mean down the road? How do we put in place steps that get us to where we need to be 5, 10, 30 years down the road, and real solutions, not bandage, stopgap measures that, yes, work for a month or 2, but don't resolve the problem as we move forward into the future.
Thank you. And I'll ask you the same question, Dr. Rolle. When you look at the chamber constituency, what are you seeing in terms of business thinking or preparation around their resiliency?
So, Governor, what I'll do is I'll take resiliency, and I'll be quick, from a standpoint of 2 angles. One, resiliency in terms of how well a business bounces back from adversity. And when I think about adversity, I think about the headlines today relative to tax codes and disagreements in those, and how well do you maneuver that type of adversity as a business. Provide the provision of better tax codes, better collaboration, more educational campaigns when things are changed or when there's added requirements such as the now audited financials, etc. And so as a business, I always look at it as an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. And so being ahead of the game, but also lobbying through organizations like the Chamber and allowing us to, through our leverage relationships, to partner and work with the government, especially places like Department of Inland Revenue, to kind of help with making sure that businesses are resilient in that they can survive some of these challenges that they're having today. I echo the same sentiments of Mr. Sands when you think about a business continuity plan. The only thing I would add is making sure it's continuously refined. And so not the same plan that you had when you started business 2 years ago, in some instances 1 year ago, is still current today. And so how well are you maintaining that? How well are you ensuring that there are partnerships so that I know that at the end of the day, if my system goes down, I can rely on Mr. Sands' Starlink for maybe one day to help. And so how well are you doing those things and refining your business continuity plan? That's what we're doing from a chamber standpoint to assist our constituents.
Thank you. And Dr. Hamilton, civil society has any views on this?
Certainly we do. We recently introduced 2 new committees in Civil Society Bahamas, principally the Resident Experts Committee and an Economics Committee. And the whole focus behind that is taking into consideration a national development plan. The reality of the resident experts is geared towards consultancy with respect to helping the NGOs to pursue grant writing, securing grants. You'd be aware that during the Dorian experience, a number of international NGOs converged on the country. We weren't ready for them. We want to be ready this time around. And so what we've, as a part of the training process, as a matter of fact, when we worked along the central bank in light of the financial literacy program. We did another program in conjunction with that program, which exposed a number of the NGOs. As a matter of fact, not only for the adults, but we have student population who was also engaged in that process. So it's a matter of planning, being proactive. I mentioned I'd like to see a combination of the NGOs and the cooperative sector coming together. Mm-hmm. And we're definitely going to be talking to Chamber some more about that. The other part of it is that recently we were doing some research to determine the national contribution of the civil society sector to GDP. That's an interesting study to take place. So we are putting the doors open to encourage partnership in that regard. CPDC, as a regional body, we're working with them, but there's also international links as well that we're embracing to ensure this happening. Now, once we can get that foundational plank laid properly, I think we'll be well on our way for resiliency going into the future.
Well, thank you very much. So we are just about at the end of our discussion today. And let me say that a very important part of what the central bank is doing really is financial literacy oriented in focus, and really getting businesses and individuals to understand the environment in which they operate and how to manage the items that are within their control. I think some of that comes across today when we start to talk about business plans and resiliency, as well as understanding the experience or the process around getting credit. We acknowledge as well, and as part of the central bank's work plan, that there's still an incredible amount of work that has to be done from the central bank side and the government side to make the environment friendlier for business. And so we're not going to retract from that. We're going to push ahead there. But I hope that in addition to that point, we take away the lesson of how important it is within the business operator for the owners of the businesses to be attentive to what it is that they need to be doing to stay viable. And I think, Mr. Sands, you mentioned in many cases that in the family islands we have to be attentive as well to the sophistication of the customers and the clients, and to understand how that factors into the service delivery level. But I want to thank you all tremendously for being here today.
Thank you, Governor.
Most pleased to be here and making the contribution.
Yep. And so this, I think it's been the third or the fourth in our Harbourside discussions. We have at least 2 more plans for 2024, and I'm confident by the time as we get to November or December when we do the final one, the weather is going to be mild enough so that we can truthfully return to the Harbourside so that our viewers can see the Harbourside. But Harbourside, we have a collaboration with Guardian Radio, so these conversations are rebroadcasted on Guardian Radio. You can also find them on the Central Bank social media page, and we have a collaboration with ZNS to air these on TV. If you have any comments or suggestions regarding this or future programs, we also welcome your input, so you can send us an email to harboursidechats@centralbankbahamas.com, and we welcome hearing from you. And having said that, I want to thank all of you for joining us for this conversation, and we look forward to engaging with you in subsequent and future programs on Harbourside Chat. Thank you.